All right. Well, joining us on the line tonight is a man who I wish we were talking to him in not so sad circumstances tonight, but I'm so excited to have him on the line. He's a sports anchor for WPIX in New York. He's a studio host for the WWE for This Week in WWE. He is the one and only Scott Stanford. Mr. Stanford, thank you for joining the two-man power trip of wrestling.
Gentlemen, it's great to be here. You forgot to mention 7 Emmys, but it's okay. I'll let you slide.
See, that's my follow-up line. I save the awards for the second line.
It's all right. My wife uses those for door stoppers these days, so don't worry.
Well, listen, like I said at the top, I'm excited to have you on the show, but we are coming off of a very sad day in professional wrestling, especially for those in the broadcasting realm and anybody who grew up in the 1980s with the passing of Mean Gene Okerlund. And I want to get to Mean Gene in just a second here, but I want to start with you. You've got such an awesome career going. You're rocking and rolling in New York City on WPIX, the legendary WPIX, as well as still working for WWE, doing the studio show This Week in WWE. I just want to know, how do you manage all of that? That is one hell of a workload.
You know what the amazing thing is? All these, I've been with WWE now almost 10 years, and before Pix, I was at NBC, and never have the two interfered with each other ever. Most of the time when I'm broadcasting in New York, I'm working at night. And all of the WWE, production up on the studio is done, earlier in the morning till mid-afternoon. So I'll get up nice and early. I'll go up to Stanford, Connecticut. I actually cover 3 or 4 states, I think, in the span of 2 hours. I'll go from New Jersey through New York to Connecticut, up to Stanford, bang out a couple of studio shows, get back in the car, and come down to Pix 11 back into New York City. So the timing works out perfectly. I never have to tell either master that I can't make something or another, or else I'd be in big trouble.
And hell yeah, if you got a track record of almost 10 years with WWE, then you definitely know how to manage that time correctly, because that is one hell of a commitment. I know the television studio very well, and to do that drive, especially in that drive time, that is in itself is quite the haul. But also with WPIX, I mean, I can't say enough about growing up watching WPIX and watching Sal Marciano at night doing his thing.
Lord.
So, of course, it's a coveted spot. So, again, it's one of those things, you're working for two of the greatest of all time.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, there was at one point when I don't know if you guys remember, we used to do the Raw and SmackDown pre-shows at 7:30 on the WWE Network. Myself, Corey Graves, and Booker T, and the King. So I would come to Pix, do the 5 and 6 o'clock shows. I would run to Grand Central Station, jump on the train, and the train would take me to Stanford by about 7 o'clock. I would run in the studio, do the pre-show with them till 8 o'clock, and then a car would take me back down to Pix to do the 10 o'clock show. So that's when, it got a little hairy, but I survived it. I'm still going. I'm still going strong.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I will kind of segue into what we were talking about, the sad news of the week, and it is the passing of Mean Gene Okerlund. And I was able to see the tribute that you did for him on Pix 11 last night, which we're recording this in real time. This is the day after the news broke that Mean Gene passed away. What were your first thoughts after hearing the news? Obviously, the sadness as a coworker, but also I know growing up you were a big fan, so the sadness of kind of somebody you watched as you were growing up and kind of getting into the business.
Yeah, you know what? Mean Gene was he was my idol, and when it came down yesterday morning, I was actually at WWE, and I walked into one of the executives' offices just to say Happy New Year, how you been? And he just got the text that Gene had passed away. So as I was walking in, he looked up at me and said, Gene Okerlund just died, or he passed away last night, and they just found out. And it was it's one of those things where, when you hear someone that or someone that a relative or someone that you're in love with passes away, and you just get that frozen, you just you freeze in your tracks, like it's almost surreal, and you have to process it for a second. And when I realized what he had said, I was just like, oh man, you got to be kidding me. And it just as like this wave of depression comes over your body. And I had seen Mean Gene about a month ago because he comes up to Stanford once a month. He was coming up to shoot a show called Vintage that airs on the WWE Network with Charlie Caruso. And Gene, the last couple of times he showed up, he wasn't feeling well. He didn't look well. And we all knew that he didn't look great, and he had a lot of problems standing up, problems with his legs. And just to hear what happened, it really put a damper on everything everybody was doing in the studio yesterday. Because believe me, from the guy who the security guard at the door to the last producer, he is just beloved by everyone.
Yeah, John and I also just saw Mean Gene Thanksgiving weekend down in North Carolina, and he was sitting the whole time, so obviously we couldn't see if he was having any real problems, but you could arguably say that he did have the biggest crowd, the longest line, because he was that staple. He's everybody's childhood if you grew up in the 1980s, and then even the fans from the 90s recognize him from his time in WCW. He was a huge part of the Monday Night Wars. But what did he still bring to the table in terms of what he was doing for WWE up until his passing? Because still, obviously, the knowledge is still there. Obviously, his experience is still there. But what does he kind of bring to the table for somebody working in the WWE now and trying to, learning the ropes on their own?
Well, I got to tell you, there was no better broadcaster / interviewer than Mean Gene, and I was explaining it to somebody yesterday here at Pix 11 when they asked me, what made this guy so special. When he said your name, he made you sound like a superstar. And the one thing at WWE is when you're an interviewer, your job is to put the talent over, make them look bigger than they are. And when Gene Okerlund said your name, it was almost like putting your name in lights on a marquee. And growing up, like you guys said, in the mid-'80s, I was in high school and college watching him do his thing. I would imitate Mean Gene, any microphone I could find. I would go, all right, Hulk Hogan, come on in. And then I would stand in front of a camera. This Monday night, Madison Square Garden, it's going to be the Macho Man, Randy Savage. And I would try to emulate him. So when I got to meet him, and then I would see him at the WrestleManias and the big events, we'd walk into the same room and I'd go, all right, Meet Gene, come on in. And he would, right back, hey, Scotty, how's the news business? And it was just, we'd start talking to each other in his voice. And it was just amazing. If you go on YouTube and look at Mean Gene's videos you could literally sit there for hours and watch how funny he was and his expressions and just his movements and the way he would handle the Hulk Hogans and Macho Mans of the world. You could watch that. We were just watching him yesterday. He was teaching Bobby the Brain how to play golf, and it was almost like Abbott and Costello. It was phenomenal. So those days, the old school WWE days, which you don't see today, where the interviewers have very limited roles. He was literally part of the show. He was just as part of that show as the superstars were themselves.
And not only that, everybody knows Hulk Hogan, they say Mean Gene, because those two were linked together through 3 companies over the span of 20 plus years. And basically, the two of them were like peanut butter and jelly. When you say, let me tell you something, Mean Gene, you know exactly who said it.
Oh, yeah.
But now when you're getting into your career, is that something you kind of aspire for, is to have that link? So whereas you may work for a network and people remember you as, hey, well, he was the sports guy at WPIX. People think of a wrestler and they think of a Mean Gene. Did you think getting into the business that you were going to try to find somebody that you would be identified with like a Mean Gene was?
Well, you know what? When I first got into WWE, there were, and I was doing interviews on Raw, and I was doing the play-by-play, the commentary on WWE superstars, and all that good stuff. I had a chance to do everything there, and still doing it. There would be people who would write to me on Twitter or social media and say, "You remind me of Mean Gene," and that was just, the ultimate compliment anybody could ever get, because I think I probably try to be just like Gene when I would interview somebody, with a Randy Orton or a Big Show. I would probably even change my voice a little bit just out of habit to try and sound like him. But it's just, there's only one, and I'm hoping one day when it's all said and done, when the new people come up, they could say, "Hey, you remind me of that Scott Stanford guy. He was pretty good."
Now, we're talking about Mean Gene and everything else. And were you a huge wrestling fan growing up? Is that like kind of was your goal to get into the business and be Mean Gene? Was that always, a thought in your mind? You loved the wrestling business?
I have a video online when I was about 18 years old when my older brother got one of the first video cameras that came out. He was into the video business. We have that thing set up, and we had him walk in on a box, so he looks like he's about 7 feet tall. We called him the Starman. And I think I have a poster behind us. Pedro Morales takes on Mil Mascaras, one of those posters behind me. And I'm literally standing there on camera with my brother, who looks like 7 feet tall, and I'm absolutely emulating Mean Gene because we were huge wrestling fans. My grandparents used to take us to the Garden. I remember Monday nights. Monday. Now you have pay-per-views every week. You have champions every week. Wrestling on air. Back when we were watching it, if you remember, when Howard Finkel was the ring announcer. When that microphone would come down from the ceiling of Madison Square Garden, once a month on Monday nights at the Garden, that is when the big matches happened, and you could only watch them on closed circuit TV. That was like the pay-per-view back then. So you only saw the Bruno Sammartinos of the world being interviewed, during the week on the weekly Saturday morning shows. You would never see those guys wrestle. You'd only see them wrestle on those Monday nights, so that the storylines would all get built up through the interviews and the attacks here and there. But they would only compete on Monday nights once a month at the Garden is when you would see them actually in action on TV. So, I remember the boot camp match between Sergeant Slaughter and the Iron Sheik. I remember at Shea Stadium, you had Bruno Sammartino and Larry Zbyszko in the steel cage match. We were big wrestling fans growing up. And then when I saw Mean Gene and I wanted to be a broadcaster, I said, that's my guy. That's who I'm going to be when I grow up. So I'm still working on it, but I hope to get there one day.
So 7 Emmys later, I don't know. You're kind of getting close. Getting closer. Now, as far as you're saying, you want to be Mean Gene, what was it like when you actually got to work with Mean Gene? I mean, that was kind of cool, and you guys got to play off of each other a bit.
Yeah, no, he was great. I mean, Mean Gene, I said this too, as big as he was, known all over the world, anytime you needed him to do something for you, he was there. I mean, the guy did not have an ego about him, nicest guy in the world. I remember when we were doing when Zack Ryder and I were doing his The True Long Island Story, and we were doing bits and pieces. I grabbed Gene at the studio a couple of times to do things for us. And I just remember the first time I met him, I think was maybe WrestleMania 27 or 28, maybe in Miami, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken. And I just walked into the green room and saw him sitting there on a couch. I plopped down next to him and I said, Mean Gene, you've been my hero since I'm a kid. And we hit it off since then. Every time I saw him, hey, Scotty, that's the way he would say it. And I just, I would tell my wife, who has no idea who he was at the time. I said, you can't even understand what that means to me, that I'm hanging out now. This guy's a friend of mine, who I watched on TV all those years in high school and college. So it's kind of surreal. You get used to it after a while, but it's still very surreal at the time.
Very, very cool. And it's awesome to kind of work with the hero and kind of work with him. And I always thought with you, when you had him on, you did that funny thing about Zack Ryder. I always thought that Zack Ryder might have been your Hulk Hogan, right? I mean, you were trying to kind of get him over with his show and doing little bits and pieces behind the scenes and even on YouTube.
Yeah, listen, I'll tell you what. Those were the days where I was showing up to do WWE Superstars, which we were shooting before Raw every week. And when those shows were over, Zach we'd go back and shoot our stuff. And I mean, we would just, with Dolph Ziggler and all the other guys who were back there. And his The True Long Island Stories, I think, got me more over than anything else I was doing at the time. Because, I mean, he was getting 200, 300,000 views on YouTube on those shows. And you know how popular Zach became there for a little while. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, before every house show, before every Raw, every SmackDown, all you heard was, we want Ryder. If you remember, You had The Rock in the ring at Madison Square Garden. They were chanting, "We want Ryder," with The Rock in the ring doing a promo. So I think the Z2 Long Island story is what really kind of catapulted me into the WWE universe public eye, if you will. So we really, you don't get paid extra to do it. It was just something we had a lot of fun doing. We were shooting it on a phone. So it was just, all these fun things we're doing, and he would go home and edit it during the week. And it was just, it was a blast, a lot of fun.
Hey, we were there. Survivor Series 2011. The Rock, that was great. Obviously, him and Cena versus The Miz and Truth, but everyone was chanting, "We want Ryder" during that promo. That was great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we also saw a different side of you, maybe the heel side of you, so to speak, as you were playing Rot, and you had that cool jacket as well. If you remember.
Yes, that was my one heel turn, and then I turned back very quickly. People still looking to find. I say he's in a hot tub in Vegas with a couple of hookers. Rock. That's where he's been for the last.
Was that something that just was like something like the WWE had said, or is it just something that you just come up with on your own? Like, or you and Zach kind of come up with? I'm just going to try to play different characters, kind of throw this around.
Oh yeah, nobody. That was his own thing, and we would, during the week we would talk, and I'd say, hey, why don't we do this? Let's do a commercial for, Zack Ryder's Bro Nuts and Broski in a bottle and all these funny things, and then he would just put it out. Nobody ever looked at it to tell us what we were, if we could do it or not. We just did it. Hope for the best.
Now, when you're doing that and you show that to Mean Gene, what's his reaction to the show? Did he like it? Did he like the Internet Championship and all that stuff? Or did he give you any, funny one-liner, any zingers about it?
Oh, not that I remember. I remember him. He knew about the show because when I told him what we were doing, he had heard about it. And then obviously I probably showed him some things on the phone. But listen, this is a guy who's a legend. He gets on a plane, shows up, does his on cameras, has some dinner, and goes back. So that's Gene was kind of doing his own thing, and he was already past the point of caring really about what anybody thought, and really what the hot things were going on around him at the time. Just listen. The only thing you could say about Mean Gene is he was just, if you want to rate him on a scale of 1 to 10, he was a 15 as far as great guys go. That's all I could tell you.
As far as Mean Gene, what is because everyone always has a great Mean Gene story. It's funny, you talk to this old school wrestler, he's got a funny Mean Gene story. Some Mean Gene stories that maybe we can't even air. It's very, very funny, very good. Maybe a little too edgy. You can't air it, believe it or not. But, what's your favorite kind of Mean Gene story with yourself?
It's hard to remember. I didn't get to spend that much time with him, aside from seeing him at the WrestleManias or seeing him up at the studio. Very briefly, we would hang out and just chuckle. But the one thing that'll always just stand out in my mind is just me doing his impression, and then him, coming right back at me. Like it was nothing. Yeah, that's not really a good impression of me, he would say. And then he would go, you got to do it like this. All right, Scott Stanford, come on in. And I would just go, all right, Gino, this Monday night, Madison Square Garden. We just go back and forth. But that's what I'll always remember about my personal experience with him. Just a genuine guy. And he always complimented me, told me what things I was doing were great. And always a complimentary guy. You sound great. Look how great your tie looks today. He was just never a negative word out of that man.
Now, as far as Mean Gene, there's so many awesome moments. I mean, you mentioned the thing with him and Bobby Heenan with golf. And I remember Andre putting his hand over Mean Gene's face and it covered up his whole face. Couldn't see it. You got the classic, let me tell you something, Mean Gene, the Hogan or Mean, woo, by God, Gene.
Yeah.
With Flair. There's so many good ones. What's your kind of favorite, Mean Gene-ism?
I think, it's got to be, it's got to be Hulk, right? Brother Mean Gene. And just the way the guys would include him into whatever promo they were doing. We were watching yesterday when Macho Man comes with the coffee creamer, and he was talking about, oh yeah, the cream rises to the top. And just, you look at Gene's face, and there was another one where he started interviewing. I forget who it was. I just lost the track of who he was interviewing. But he looks off camera and he says to somebody, "Put out that cigarette. There's no smoking here." Right in the middle of the person's interview. And it was just, we were cracking up. I do. You know why it's funny? Because he's so deadpan, and his voice is so booming that it just makes it funnier. Now he was the perfect straight guy for that stuff.
Yes, Royal Rumble '92 after Flair wins the title with you got Mr. Perfect, Flair, Bobby Heenan, even Jack Tunney there, and deadpan. Put that cigarette out.
Right, put that cigarette out. That was good. It's just great. It's just great stuff. You know, the golden oldie days of the old school days of WWE. Just fantastic.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just awesome, and it's awesome that you're kind of an old school guy with a new school flavor. And obviously, we talked about Emmy Awards and everything else. What is your kind of the favorite job that you've had with WWE? Because you've done so much, and obviously you've done so much in sports and NBC and WPIX. We're talking about the Emmy Award winning and everything else. What's your favorite job you've had within WWE?
My favorite, that's easy, because my favorite moment at WWE, and I have a ton of them, but my favorite one was WrestleMania 29 at MetLife Stadium. We did the first pay-per-view pre-show, which back then were like on YouTube and Facebook and all that other stuff together, and it was myself, it was JR, Kofi Kingston, and Dusty Rhodes. That was my one moment with Dusty Rhodes as well. And we did the pre-show inside that stadium at MetLife, and it was just phenomenal. I mean, 75,000 people chanting for Dusty and JR, and they're swarming us for autographs and pictures, and just it was just the electricity in the building was phenomenal, and that'll always be. And then we did the post show as well. That'll always be, I think, my favorite night in WWE.
That's that's great. Hey, coming back to MetLife in not too short time, in April 7th. So we're right around the corner from another WrestleMania in the great state of New Jersey, the beautiful Garden State. But Scott, as we wrap it up here, we really appreciate you coming on with us tonight. And next time you come on, I'll make sure that I mention you getting that 8th Emmy Award, because I'm sure that's coming up on the horizon for you. But to just kind of wrap up the Mean Gene talk, if fans are going to look back at Mean Gene's career, what do you think the one thing they'll remember about Mean Gene is?
The one thing they should remember about Mean Gene is greatest interviewer / announcer, not commentator, because he wasn't a commentator, greatest interviewer / announcer, WWE history. There'll never be another Mean Gene Okerlund.
Perfectly said. And Scott, now, like I said, as we wrap it up, please share with the listeners of the Two-Man Power Trip where they can find everything going on in the world of the great Scott Stanford, if they're not already linked into that WWE network and watching you every week. But where can the fans and the listeners find Scott Stanford?
You could find me all the time on WWE Network, at Scott Stanford 1 on Twitter. I think at Scott Stanford 1 on Instagram. And then, of course, Pix 11 at 6 and 10 every weeknight.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Scott. We really appreciate it. And hopefully get to talk to you again down the road and talk a little bit more about those glory days of Mean Gene and the WWE in the 80s.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.